she whispered hoarsely. I never meant for this to happen. Overwhelmed with regret, she stood at a dead end. Her relationship with Asher, destroyed. Her heart ached with distress and confusion. Where did it all go wrong, she muttered quietly. But Asher wasn't hearing any of it. He was lost in a whirlwind of fury and disgust. His voice roared even louder, his face twisted in rage. Get out, he shouted. Get out of my house. His anger filled the room, creating an atmosphere so thick with tension it felt like it could suffocate anyone within it. Chloe stood frozen, her tears falling uncontrollably. She didn't resist or fight back. She had nothing left to give. With each word hurled at her, her spirit slowly fractured. The butler tried to calm Asher, but it was useless. Eventually, he just stood aside, quietly awaiting further orders. Then, without another word, Asher stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. He didn't say where he was going or when, or if he'd return. The house echoed with silence after his departure. Chloe stood there, a flood of emotions crashing over her: grief, despair, a strange sense of relief. At last, she was no longer under his shadow, but it was a bitter kind of freedom. The butler shot her a cold, contemptuous glance. Just because he left doesn't mean it's over. I hope you reflect on what you did tonight, he said before turning and walking away to his quarters. Chloe slowly picked up her gown from the floor, put it back on to cover herself, and made her way to her room. Now alone in her room, Chloe felt utterly lost and hollow. Hopelessness wrapped around her like a shroud. She felt like she had no escape until an idea came to her. She thought maybe calling her parents might help soothe her pain. She dialed her father's number, her voice trembling with sobs as she explained everything. But instead of comfort, all she received were harsh, cutting words. The emotional blow left her shattered. She had expected warmth and support. She thought her parents might guide her through this darkness. Instead, their judgment and anger crushed her further. Their cold concern for status and money made her feel even more isolated. For the first time in her life, she truly began to resent them. Needing space and clarity, Chloe decided to leave her room. Though shame weighed her down, she forced herself out and took a quiet walk around the block. As she walked, her mind reeled with thoughts she couldn't sort through. Then she passed the wine cellar and stepped inside, pouring herself a glass. She sat at a small table, sipping alone, her thoughts swirling. Everything felt overwhelming. The house was cloaked in night stillness, the maids having long gone to bed. The only sound was the soft clink of glass as she poured another drink. Eventually, after finishing her wine, she stumbled slightly and returned to her room, exhausted and emotionally spent. Meanwhile, Asher had grabbed his car keys and left the house behind. He drove straight to his penthouse, his personal sanctuary, where no one could bother him. Once inside, he sank into a chair, finally away from the chaos. But even in this quiet, his thoughts wouldn't rest. He seethed, murmuring bitterly to himself, if I hadn't figured out her plan, I would have been her victim. Lucky for me, I've got willpower. Even in the stillness of the penthouse, Asher's anger continued to boil. He paced the room, restless and agitated, craving an outlet for his frustration. He debated whether to call someone and vent or to simply ride the wave alone. After pacing for several minutes, he settled on a run. He changed into his workout clothes and headed to the treadmill. As he jogged, each step helped strip away his fury. He focused on his breath, the sound of his feet hitting the belt, the coolness of the air. With each stride, he felt a little more in control. When the run ended, he returned to his room, drained but more at peace. Still unable to sleep, Asher showered and moved to his study to catch up on work. As he sat at his desk, a renewed sense of drive kicked in. He dove into projects he had neglected, and soon he was in a productive flow. The hours flew by, and before long, dawn crept in through the windows. Finally feeling a sense of accomplishment, Asher climbed into bed. But the moment his head hit the pillow, the memories of what had happened resurfaced. The resentment toward Chloe and her entire family still lingered, threatening to pull him back into his rage. Despite that, he forced himself to rest, deciding he'd deal with it another day. Back at the office, Mr. Paulo was burning the midnight oil, trying desperately to salvage his company from the brink of collapse. In the middle of it all, he received a call from Chloe. She was still sobbing uncontrollably, struggling to get her words out. Paulo, initially calm, tried to listen. He asked her to explain what happened between her and Asher. But as she recounted the events, Paulo's composure cracked. Anger surged through him, and he lashed out at her before cutting the call. His eyes drifted to the neatly stacked documents on his desk, and his frustration only deepened. He was livid, not just at the failure of his plans, but at the fact that he blamed Chloe for it all. She hadn't earned any leniency from him. He sat there seething over all the energy and time he had invested. Months of coordination had gone up in smoke. Now he felt stuck, without a plan, without a clue of what to do next. But then a realization struck him. He had only told Chloe about the plan that day. How could she have procured the drug so quickly unless she had already been planning it herself? That thought sent another wave of fury through him. He slammed his hand against the table, then drank the glass of water before him in one gulp. Eventually, Paulo recognized that this path of anger would get him nowhere. If he didn't let go, he'd never move forward. Taking a deep breath, he centered himself and made a decision to walk away for a bit and clear his head. Only then could he return to the drawing board and rebuild from this mess. As Mr. Paulo strolled through the quiet city streets, he let his mind wander freely. He wasn't focused on any specific problem or issue. He simply allowed his thoughts to flow. Gradually, the weight on his shoulders began to lift, and he started to feel a little more like himself again. His mind shifted toward the future and the goals he still hoped to achieve. New ideas began to form, and with them came a flicker of hope and motivation. He knew he couldn't let the failure of his most recent plan define him. It was time to learn, adapt, and move forward. Resolved, Mr. Paulo decided that his first step would be to call Chloe the next morning. He wanted to thoroughly review what had gone wrong with her execution. He needed to understand the precise points of failure, not just to address her mistakes, but to help her avoid repeating them. He mentally retraced the planning and the outcome, identifying multiple flaws in both, taking mental notes of these errors and thinking through possible corrections. This gave him a renewed sense of control and purpose. Feeling like he'd made solid progress during his walk, he realized he now needed rest and a chance to recharge before moving ahead with his new strategy. He made his way back to the office, collected his briefcase, and then headed home. Upon arriving, a wave of relief washed over him. He removed his coat, dropped it on the couch, and sat down with a deep sigh. The quiet comfort of his home brought a sense of calm he hadn't felt all day. He knew he'd made the right choice by coming back. His mind and body needed this moment of peace. He walked upstairs to take a shower. The hot water was a balm, easing the tension from his muscles and washing away the mental stress. He lingered under the stream, letting the warmth soothe his nerves. Afterward, refreshed and in clean clothes, he headed downstairs, where he found his wife, Tessie, had surprisingly prepared dinner. The aroma caught him off guard. Tessie rarely cooked. It was a pleasant surprise, and he sensed there was intention behind her effort. Perhaps she felt the emotional distance between them and wanted to bridge it with something familiar. Over dinner, they talked for the first time in a while. It felt like quality time. They shared updates about their days and spoke briefly about future plans. The tension between them seemed to ease, and Tessie seemed content just having his attention. She'd sensed his distance and thought preparing a meal might stir old memories of when things felt simpler between them. After the meal, they settled on the couch to watch a movie together. The calm didn't last long. As Mr. Paulo watched the screen, Tessie looked at him thoughtfully before deciding to bring up a request for money. But her timing could not have been worse. It struck him like a bolt out of nowhere, completely ruining the serenity of the evening. Her request shattered the fragile peace he had just begun to enjoy. Frustration surged inside him. Is she really asking for money right now? He thought. Doesn't she understand the crisis I'm facing? The fact that the company is in serious decline? His anger simmered just beneath the surface. He had already provided so much support, both financially and emotionally, and yet she continued to ask for more with no regard for their current struggles. His disappointment was palpable. He didn't want to explode on her, but it was becoming difficult to stay composed. "I'm sorry, Tessie," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "But I can't give you the money you're asking for. I've already done more than enough. I understand that things are hard, but I can't be your personal bank." Tessie stared at him, stunned. Bitterness crept into her expression, and her heart hardened. She felt underappreciated, like her years of loyalty and support meant nothing to him. She had stood by him through it all, helped him plan, sacrificed her own desires, and now this. Jealousy and resentment flared. She felt abandoned. With a sharp tone, she snapped, "What's money you can't give me? I've been your faithful wife, helped you build your business, and this is how you repay me?" Mr. Paulo was speechless, overwhelmed by the emotional storm she unleashed. He was drained physically, mentally, emotionally. He wanted to explain his side, but he didn't know where to start. Any attempt to reason might only worsen things, so he made a decision. He would postpone the discussion. He wasn't in the right state to talk calmly or effectively. He rose silently and walked off to the bedroom, hoping a night's rest would give him clarity. Alone in the living room, Tessie sat in silence. But remorse didn't come to her. Defensiveness did. In her mind, she justified everything she'd said. She didn't believe she was in the wrong. She convinced herself that Paulo was being unfair and cold. She'd only asked for what she felt she deserved. But her bitterness began to curdle into something darker, a thirst for revenge. She wasn't ready to forgive. She felt betrayed and disrespected, and her mind spun with possibilities of how she could get back at him. Still, a quiet voice in her head began to challenge her thoughts. It whispered that maybe she was being unfair, that maybe, just maybe, Paulo's anger had a reason behind it. She began to remember all the times he had been patient with her, supportive of her mistakes, generous beyond reason. Memories of his kindness began to pierce through her indignation. Torn between resentment and guilt, Tessie felt a deep, painful sense of shame. She realized how selfish she had been, how blind she'd become to his struggles. Her heart softened. She knew she needed to make things right. Summoning courage, Tessie got up and walked to their bedroom. She found Paulo lying in bed, tossing and turning restlessly. For a moment, she stood in the doorway, gathering herself. Then she stepped forward and spoke. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I've been selfish and demanding. I haven't truly appreciated everything you've done for me. I shouldn't expect you to give me money like it's nothing. I let my emotions cloud my judgment." Paulo turned and looked at her. Her apology caught him off guard. Tessie had never apologized before. Not like this. The room was dark, the silence thick. He sat there quietly, letting her words sink in. She broke the silence again. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away," she continued. "I know I hurt you, and I can't undo that, but I want to be better. I want to be more understanding. I'm not perfect, but I'm willing to change." After a long pause, Mr. Paulo finally responded. "Thank you for your apology," he said softly. "I can tell you're sincere, and I appreciate that. It will take time for me to trust you again, but I'm willing to try. I care about you, Tessie, and I want to see you thrive." Relief washed over Tessie. Gratitude filled her chest. She knew this didn't mean everything was magically fixed, but she was grateful for the chance to make things right. They talked for a while, quietly and honestly, before Paulo gently suggested she get some rest. "You've had a long day," he said. "Take care of yourself." She nodded and climbed into bed. But sleep didn't come easily. Despite her heartfelt apology, Tessie still believed she wasn't entirely wrong. Her mind spun again with manipulative thoughts. Deep down, something inside her still clung to her darker instincts. It was like she was trapped in a cycle she didn't know how to escape. As her thoughts spiraled, her body began to protest. Exhaustion took hold. Her limbs felt heavy. Her head ached. Her mind was overloaded. She realized she had pushed herself too far. If she didn't stop now, she might spiral into something worse. Finally surrendering, Tessie decided to give herself a break. She pulled the blanket over herself, turned toward the opposite side of the bed, and let her eyes drift closed. Paolo was already sound asleep, snoring gently. She looked at him with a hint of disdain and let out a soft hiss, then turned her back to him. She closed her eyes, trying to quiet the storm in her head. It wasn't easy, but eventually, sleep began to take her. As Kiara slept peacefully, blissfully unaware of the chaos stirring in both the Huxley and Anderson households, a storm was beginning to form in the distance. The sky darkened by the minute, and the wind began to howl. A jagged bolt of lightning split the sky, followed by a clap of thunder that rumbled through the ground. Still, Kiara remained undisturbed in her bed, safe and comfortable, completely oblivious to the storm brewing outside and to the troubles unfolding in her own neighborhood. By morning, she woke up early and headed to her son Casey's room to wake him. Today was a big day. She would be registering him for school. After getting herself ready, Kiara stepped into her son's room. "Wake up, buddy. Time to get up and start your big day," she said cheerfully. A muffled groan came from beneath the covers in response. Kiara sighed. Getting Casey out of bed was never an easy task. "Come on, you've got to get up," she said again, this time more firmly. After plenty of gentle coaxing and repeated nudges, Casey finally shuffled out of bed, still groggy. "Mom, do I really have to go to school?" he mumbled, his eyelids heavy with sleep. "Yes, you do," Kiara answered enthusiastically. "You're going to have so much fun and make lots of new friends." Casey sighed tiredly but didn't argue. "Come on, let's get you dressed and fed," she said, leading him toward the kitchen. Once there, Kiara poured him a bowl of cereal and sat across from him. "Eat up, then we'll get you dressed and ready to go," she encouraged, trying to keep things light. But Casey just stared blankly into his cereal bowl, unmoving. "You've got to eat something, sweetheart, so you'll have energy for your big day," Kiara said, her patience starting to thin. "I'm not hungry," Casey muttered. He wasn't exactly thrilled about going to school. In fact, he'd much rather stay home, either playing video games or trying to hack into the FS company's systems for fun. But seeing the excitement on his mom's face made him abandon that idea. "Okay, if you don't want cereal, how about some pancakes?" Kiara offered, hopeful that his favorite breakfast might spark some appetite. "No thanks," he replied, voice flat and unenthusiastic. Kiara was beginning to feel a little desperate. She needed to get something into him before they left. Then an idea popped into her mind. "If you eat your breakfast, we can stop at the donut shop on the way to school," she said casually, as if it were no big deal. The moment she said it, Casey's eyes lit up. "Really?" he asked, suddenly alert. "Yes, really," she said, smiling at his quick turnaround. "But you have to eat your breakfast first, okay?" "Okay," he agreed, finally picking up his spoon and digging into his cereal. He still didn't like it, but he couldn't say no to a donut. Wink soon enough, Casey had finished his cereal and was visibly more energized. "All right, now let's get you dressed," Kiara said, bringing him back to his room. She helped him into a clean shirt and pants, then smiled. "Okay, we're all set. We can stop at the donut shop now, right?" Casey asked with a hopeful expression. Kiara laughed. His face looked so adorably excited. She gently pinched his cheeks and said, "Yes, baby." She handed him his backpack, took his hand, and they stepped out of the house together. In the garage, their driver was already waiting. "Good morning, madam and young master," he greeted them with a slight bow. Casey gave a small smile and nodded in acknowledgement, while Kiara said warmly, "Good morning. How was your night?" The driver smiled faintly and replied, "It was fine, ma'am. Thank you for asking." "Good. Please take us to Sweet Rolls and Rolls first," she instructed, "then to Empire High School." "Yes, ma'am," the driver said before starting the engine. When they arrived at the donut shop, Casey immediately pressed his face to the glass display, scanning the choices. "Ooh, can I have a chocolate-covered donut with sprinkles?" he asked eagerly. "Absolutely," Kiara said, thrilled to see him so happy. He munched on the donut contentedly as they returned to the car and continued toward the school. As they pulled up outside, Casey looked out the window and said, "Thanks, Mom. That was the best breakfast ever." Walking into the school building, Kiara felt a mix of pride and relief. She had managed to start her son's day off on a positive note, and now he actually looked excited. As they neared the classroom, his teacher, Mrs. Jones, greeted them with a warm smile. "Good morning, Kiara and Casey. It's great to see you both." "Good morning, Mrs. Jones," they said in unison as they stepped inside. As Casey entered the classroom, he instantly felt all eyes on him. It was his first day at a new school, and the idea of introducing himself made him nervous. Still, he took a deep breath and reminded himself to stay calm, even if he looked a little cold. "Hi, everyone," he said, putting on a laid-back front. "My name is Casey Thompson, and I'm new here." The other students looked at him with curiosity. Some even smiled at him. A girl raised her hand and said, "Welcome to our class, Casey. I'm Emily. I've been here since kindergarten. What's your favorite thing to do?" Casey hesitated for a moment, unsure how to answer, but then he remembered the role-play exercise he'd practiced with his mom. Looking at Emily, he responded, "Well, I like playing basketball, reading books, and playing video games." "What about you, Emily?" "Oh, I love reading, too, and I also like to draw and paint." "We can talk about books and art if you want," she said enthusiastically. Casey felt a wave of relief. Seeing that Casey had settled in, Kiara quietly left the room. After introductions, the class dove into their lessons. Casey found himself seated next to a boy named Jason, who had a friendly, outgoing vibe. "So, what's it like being the new kid?" Jason asked. Casey shrugged but opened up a bit. "It's a little scary, but everyone's been nice." "Are you from around here?" "Yep," Jason replied. "I've lived here my whole life. Maybe I can show you around after school." Looking at Jason, Casey thought, maybe making friends isn't such a bad idea after all. There was something about Jason, his friendly demeanor, his easy smile, that made Casey want to get to know him better. As the day went on, Casey began to feel more at ease. Having someone like Jason around made a big difference. When the bell rang for sports, he was genuinely excited. "Hey, Casey, want to hang out at the basketball court?" Jason asked as they packed their things. "Sure," Casey said, smiling as they walked together toward the courtyard. Spotting the basketball court, Casey turned to Jason and asked, "Want to play a game?" Jason's eyes lit up. "Definitely. You up for a little one-on-one?" Casey nodded, and the game began. It was tight. Both boys played well. In the end, Jason won by a single point. "Good game," he said, grinning. "That was fun. We should do it again sometime." Though a little disappointed, Casey always thought he was unbeatable in any game. He couldn't deny how much fun he'd had. He and Jason had bonded over basketball, sharing laughter and playful banter. As they walked back to class together, Casey felt like he had made his first real friend in this new town. This was a great day, he thought. I'm glad I moved here. The remainder of the workday was packed with activity, but Kiara and Leo handled it all with calm precision. They approached each challenge with coordination and mutual understanding, constantly checking in to ensure alignment. By the end of the day, they were both worn out but content with their accomplishments. "Excellent work today, Leo," Kiara said, stretching her arms to relieve the tension in her shoulders. "Thank you, Miss Thompson," he replied with a warm smile. She was about to say more when her phone chimed with a new notification. Checking it, she saw an email from Anderson Enterprise that read, "I will be coming to your office tomorrow to discuss our collaboration. I hope my team and I will be welcomed." A smirk curved Kiara's lips as she looked up from the screen. "You'll be representing me tomorrow," she told Leo. "The head of Anderson Enterprise is coming to talk about our partnership, and I want you to be the one to welcome them." Leo's eyes widened briefly in surprise, but he quickly composed himself. "I'd be honored, Miss Thompson," he said, a faint smile forming. "I know you'll handle it well," she replied. With that, Leo returned to his office, and Kiara made her way to the office lounge for some much-needed rest. As Asher stepped into his office, ready to dive into the workload and confront the mountain of paperwork on his desk, he didn't anticipate finding Chris already inside. He looked at Chris and said, "What's up with you?" Chris jumped when Asher spoke, as if he had been startled out of a deep trance. He looked around as if just noticing the silence for the first time. I don't know," he said, his voice sounding a little dazed. "Everything just feels off somehow." Asher frowned, a sense of foreboding settling over him. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice quiet. Chris hesitated, as if trying to find the right words. "It's like everything feels a little too quiet, a little too still," he said, his voice sounding distant and hollow. "It's like the world has gone quiet, but I don't know why." Asher looked at Chris as if he were a fool. Chris stood up from the couch and went to where Asher was sitting. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on Asher's face. "I saw Kiara today," he said, his voice low and serious. "I saw her, and she looked different." Asher felt his heart sink. It was as if his heart had just stopped when he heard it. Something that had shaken Chris to his core. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Chris looked at him again and said, word for word, "I saw Kiara today." Has Kiara truly returned from the shadows, or is something else at play? Don't miss the next chapter of this gripping saga, only on Dark Voices. Subscribe now to stay in the loop.